would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of Film Stories. Today we are leaping forwards to 2013 and we're going to take a look at Under the Skin, a 2013 film directed by Jonathan Glazer and starring Scarlett Johansson. Slight departure from usual today. I'm going to come at this from a more non-spoilery angle because if this is a film you haven't seen yet, and it came out 5 years ago, so if you haven't seen it by now, you've probably made your mind up that you're never going to, that it's not of interest to you, but I do think that this is a film that really merits taking a look at. So I'm going to try and take as non-spoilery an approach as I can while still getting into the nuts and bolts of the film's production, because the story of the film's production, it really is interesting, and the construction of the film's production is really fairly, if not unique, at least unusual. So I'm going to attempt to be fairly kind of non-spoilery in the hope that it piques your interest enough, this film story, to go and check the film out. Under the Skin started life as a novel by Michael Faber. It's published in 2000. And it's fair to say that the adaptation is into the film version is loose at best. Original screenplays were apparently hewed much closer to the source material, but as Jonathan Glazer adapted it and developed it, he began to take out more and more of the original plot, and ended up with something it's a very, 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 very minimalist film. Which is one of the really interesting things about it. It's a science fiction film. It's largely unscripted, and it has a kind of art house sensibilities about it. When it released, it got booed. I think it was Cannes that it debuted at, and it was booed. It didn't make its $13 million budget back. I think it made $9 million, but it really, beyond all of that, it's not really a project that you can judge by commercial standards. I'll get into why in a moment. Beyond all of that, it's really quite an absorbing film. Scarlett Johansson has gone on record, and it's several interviews talking about how, along with Glazer, they started out with these scripted sequences. And Glazer said that the first two drafts of the screenplay were fantastic. They just, in those drafts, he picked out what he found to be of real interest was one particular element, and his me being non-spoilery. And the more he focused on that element, the less everything else seemed to matter, until ultimately he was left with really even bare bones of the story is probably speaking euphemistically. But they did, when they came to film some of the sequences in the film, they did begin, Johansson's talks about how they did begin with scripted sequences, but Glazer was never too fond on them, and they'd often spend all day shooting a scene, and it would become looser and looser and more freeform until they were working without the aid of the script at all. She's also spoken about how in the original screenplays the film was something of a two-hander, where her character is opposed by, and if you've seen the film you'll know why this is the case, her character is opposed by the townspeople in which the film was originally set, but as Glazer started to pull more and more away from the script, that entire narrative perspective was discarded. Glazer, in terms of Glazer said the film has no aesthetic. He's tried to capture the world as it is. He said even the setting of a single light, he would seek justification for. So the aesthetic is to make the film look as real, as present, I suppose, as possible. But he does, in terms of the film's kind of aim, he talked to Film 4 about wanting to look at the world through an alien lens, and the difficulties of creating that visual language. Ultimately, to create that sense of verisimilitude, that sense of reality that he spoke about, having worked on a previous project when he used 57 hidden cameras, that's the approach that he decided to go in. So what you essentially have in this film is Scarlett Johansson, one of the most famous actors in the world, off the back of Avengers, driving around in a van in Glasgow with hidden cameras, trying to speaking to unscripted non-performers, trying to seduce them into entering her van. It's such a weird but strangely interesting setup that that alone would make me want to watch the film if I hadn't already. And I'm hoping that entices you to go and watch it as well, because it is a fantastic movie. Odd, very odd, but fantastic. Originally, the film, there was no music planned for the film until a scene about 20 minutes from the end, when somebody plays something. It'd be diegetic music within the frame, and from there on, the plan was to have a score. But in the edit, that was changed, and the score that is from a debut score from Mika Levy, who's gone on to score Natalie and Marjorie. I forget the name of it's a John Hamm film, came out in 2017. But a couple of films since. I mean, what a talented person! What a talented composer! It's a wonderful score. It's reminiscent of some of Kubrick's films, and he's just wonderful. But the film itself, in other ways, is reminiscent of Kubrick, and that's perhaps because of the subject matter, but perhaps also because, I mean, Glazer, Kubrick-esque might be a word to describe Glazer. I think he's first. He's only made a couple of films, including Sexy Beast, but he's actually a music video director, and one of his first music videos, if not his first, was 1994's Kubrick pastiche of A Clockwork Orange by Blur, the Universal. Keeping up the idea of kind of verisimilitude, you have a lot of non-professional actors in the film. There's a motorbike racing champion who has a largely non-speaking role, but a prominent role nonetheless. There are, again, a woodsman character who appears near the end in a small but very significant role. Was non-professional, something that shocked me when I look back at that scene. He was simply the owner of some land that the producers were looking to shoot on. In terms of the nature of the shoot, I've already talked about the fact that it was largely lots of it is Scarlett Johansson driving around in a van, looking to speak to and interact with non-professional actors, men on the street. But that in itself, as well as the kind of logistical problems of how can you cut something together from that which looks like it belongs on a cinema screen and looks it assimilates with everything else that you have. But on top of that, they were shooting from 30, 20 cameras at a time, and at the end of the day, they'd have hours of footage, which they'd then have to try and cut and edit to show something to Glazer before the van would be taken out the next day. It really was quite an undertaking. And they really didn't have, because they weren't really working from a script as such, they didn't really have a plan. Sounds maybe unkind, but they certainly, when they started to put the scenes together, they realised they ended up with what was effectively 88 short films that weren't cohesive, but 88 short films. So at that point, they scrapped the edit but knowing the footage, Simon's talked about this in some of his podcasts about Mad Max taking Fury Road, taking 3 months to look through the footage to get an idea of what they had. Well, putting those 88 short films together was eventually not something they decided to pursue, and they scrapped that entire edit, but it meant that they had a very good feeling for what their footage was. Upon reception, as I mentioned earlier, the film was booed at Cannes, but that's not always a bad thing. Read in The Guardian, someone said that it added to the Telegraph that added to the film's mystique, and maybe in a way it did. And even Taxi Driver was booed at that festival, so that you can take what you want from that. The film wasn't a commercial success. It made $9.5 million on release and home video against a budget of $13 million. But that's, as I mentioned earlier as well, I think that's not really the point. The film is almost wholly an artistic endeavour rather than a commercial one, despite starring a star of the magnitude of Scarlett Johansson. It's an artistic endeavour, and judged on that level alone, it has merit. And I would urge you to, if you haven't seen it, I'd urge you to see it. Seek it out. It's a great film.